The grandfather clock in the Thompson family's living room had just chimed 9. A clock when 8-year-old Lily heard the first sound that would change her life forever. The sharp crack of splintering wood as someone kicked in their front door. She had been upstairs in her bedroom, carefully arranging her collection of stuffed animals for what she called their bedtime meeting, when the violent intrusion shattered the peaceful evening routine of their quiet Denver suburb. Jenny Martinez, her 19-year-old babysitter, had been downstairs watching a romantic comedy on Netflix while folding a basket of Lily's freshly laundered clothes. The two had spent a perfect evening together, making chocolate chip cookies from scratch, playing board games, and reading 3 chapters from Lily's favorite mystery series about a girl detective. Jenny had been babysitting for the Thompson family for over 2 years, ever since Lily's parents, David and Sarah, had returned to their demanding careers after Lily started school. She wasn't just a babysitter. She was like the big sister Lily had always wished for. When the front door exploded inward, Lily's first instinct was to call out for Jenny, but something primal in her 8-year-old mind screamed danger. Instead, she dropped silently to her knees and crawled under her bed, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, Peanut, against her chest. Her heart was pounding so loudly, she was certain whoever had broken in would hear it echoing through the house. From her hiding spot beneath the pink bed frame, Lily could hear Jenny's voice, high and frightened, pleading with someone to take whatever they wanted and leave. "Please, there's money in the kitchen drawer," Jenny's trembling voice carried. "Up the stairs. Just take it and go. There's a little girl upstairs sleeping. Please don't hurt us." The intruder's voice was deep and gravelly, muffled by what Lily would later learn was a ski mask. "Shut up and sit down," he commanded, his heavy boots stomping across the hardwood floors that Lily's mother had so carefully refinished the previous summer. "Where's the safe? I know there's a safe in this house." Lily pressed her face against Peanut's soft fabric, trying to disappear into the elephant's comforting embrace. She had never heard of a safe in their house, and apparently neither had Jenny, whose confused protests only seemed to anger the intruder further. The sound of furniture being violently overturned made Lily squeeze her eyes shut tighter, wishing desperately that her parents would come home early from their anniversary dinner at the fancy restaurant downtown. For 20 agonizing minutes, Lily listened to the systematic destruction of her home. Cabinet doors slammed, drawers were yanked out, and contents scattered, and she could hear the man growing increasingly frustrated with his fruitless search. Jenny's voice had grown quieter, more desperate, as she repeatedly assured him there was no safe, offering him everything she could think of her own purse, the tablet on the coffee table, even the jewelry box on Mrs. Thompson's dresser. Then came the moment that would replay in Lily's nightmares for months to come. The intruder's patience had finally snapped completely. "You're lying to me," he snarled, and Lily heard Jenny's sharp intake of breath. "Someone told me about the safe. Big money kept in this house." "I swear I don't know about any safe," Jenny sobbed. "I'm just the babysitter. Please, I have a little sister at home. Please don't." The first gunshot cut through her words like thunder, causing Lily to bite down hard on Peanut's ear to keep from screaming. Her entire body went rigid with terror as the sound reverberated through the house. The second shot came 3 seconds later, followed by an awful silence that seemed to stretch forever. Lily lay frozen under her bed, tears streaming down her face as she listened to the intruder's heavy footsteps moving around downstairs. He was still searching, still destroying, but now there were no more voices, no more pleas for mercy. Just the horrible sounds of someone rifling through the remnants of what had been, hours earlier, a happy home. When she finally heard the front door slam shut and silence returned to the house, Lily remained hidden, too terrified to move. Hours crawled by as she clutched Peanut and waited for her parents to come home. for someone to tell her it had all been a terrible nightmare. The darkness under her bed felt like a cocoon, protecting her from a world that had suddenly become unimaginably dangerous. It was Detective Maria Santos who eventually found her at 1:17 a.m. after Lily's parents had returned home to discover the horrific scene and called 911 in hysteria. The experienced detective had searched every room in the house, following protocol, for missing persons when she noticed the small sneakers peeking out from under the bed in the pink bedroom. "Hello, sweetheart," Detective Santos had said softly, crouching down to peer under the bed. "My name is Maria. You're safe now. Can you come out and talk to me?" But Lily couldn't talk. The words had been stolen from her along with her sense of security, her trust in the world, and her beloved Jenny. She stared at the detective with wide, haunted eyes, clutching Peanut so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Even when her sobbing parents gathered her into their arms, even when the paramedics checked her for injuries, even when child psychologists tried gentle techniques to encourage her to speak, Lily remained silent. The little girl who had chattered endlessly about everything from her favorite books to her dreams of becoming a veterinarian had been reduced to nods, shakes of her head, and the occasional drawing of dark, frightening shapes that made the adults around her exchange worried glances. Somewhere in that terrified silence lay the key to solving Jenny Martinez's murder. But unlocking Lily's voice would require a miracle that no one could have imagined. The investigation was stalling, the community was paralyzed with fear, and a killer was walking free, all because the only witness to the crime was an 8-year-old girl who couldn't find her voice in a world that had suddenly become too frightening for words. Officer Tom Bradley knew something was different about Captain Rex the moment he first laid eyes on the German Shepherd puppy at the National Canine Learning Center in Colorado Springs. While other puppies in the specialized program were busy playing, chewing toys, or napping in the sunshine, Rex sat quietly observing everything around him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. His dark brown eyes held a depth that made even the most experienced trainers pause and take notice. This one's special, Dr. Amanda Foster, the center's lead animal behaviorist, had told Tom during his first visit 3 years earlier. Rex doesn't just respond to commands, he seems to understand the emotions behind them. We've never seen anything quite like it in our victim assistance program. Dr. Foster had been developing the revolutionary therapy dog program for 5 years, working specifically with dogs who could help traumatized witnesses, particularly children who had experienced severe psychological trauma. The program was born from her own childhood experience. She had been unable to speak for months after witnessing a car accident that killed her younger brother. Traditional therapy had failed, but a neighbor's gentle collie had somehow unlocked her voice when nothing else could. Rex's training had been unlike anything the center had ever attempted. Beyond the standard obedience commands, he learned to recognize the subtle signs of human distress: rapid breathing, tense body language, the particular stillness that trauma victims often displayed. He was taught to approach slowly, to never make sudden movements, and most importantly, to simply be present without demanding attention or interaction. The breakthrough in Rex's training came during a simulation exercise involving a child actor who was pretending to be traumatized, while other dogs in training either ignored the victim or became overly excited trying to comfort them. Rex had done something extraordinary. He had positioned himself exactly close enough to be comforting, but far enough away to not feel threatening, and then had begun a low, almost inaudible humming sound, a vocalization that seemed to have an immediate calming effect. We've documented this behavior in wild wolves comforting distressed pack members, Dr. Foster had explained to Tom, her voice filled with excitement. But we've never successfully trained a domestic dog to replicate it. Rex is doing this instinctively. Over the following 18 months, Rex and Tom had worked together on 43 cases involving traumatized witnesses. Their success rate was unprecedented. An astounding 91% of their cases resulted in victims being able to provide crucial testimony or information that led to arrests and convictions. Rex had helped a 5-year-old boy identify his abuser, enabled a teenager to describe a hit-and-run accident she had witnessed, and gave an elderly woman the courage to testify against the gang members who had robbed her store. But Rex's most remarkable case had been with 7-year-old Marcus, who had been rendered mute after watching his father's murder during a convenience store robbery. The boy had been silent for 4 months when Rex entered his life. Within 2 weeks of daily sessions, Marcus was not only speaking again, but was able to provide a detailed description that led to the killer's arrest. The local media had dubbed Rex the miracle dog, though Tom knew the real miracle was the inexplicable bond that formed between his partner and traumatized children. When Detective Maria Santos called the K-9 unit about Lily Thompson's case, Tom felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility that came with each new assignment. Santos had been desperately seeking alternatives after 6 weeks of traditional therapy had failed to help Lily speak. Child psychologists, trauma specialists, and even hypnotherapy had all been attempted, but the little girl remained locked in her protective silence. "This case is different, Tom," Detective Santos had explained during their briefing at the Denver Police Department. "The crime was particularly brutal, and Lily was hiding for hours listening to everything. She's the only witness we have, but she won't even acknowledge that she saw or heard anything. Without her testimony, the killer is going to walk free." Tom studied the case file, noting the similarities to other cases Rex had successfully handled, but also recognizing some unique challenges. Lily had been traumatized in her own home. Her safe space had been violated, and she had formed a strong emotional attachment to the victim. These factors often created deeper psychological barriers than random street crimes or incidents involving strangers. Rex seemed to sense the gravity of this new assignment as Tom prepared their equipment for the first meeting. The dog's behavior became more focused, more deliberate, as if he understood that this case would require all of his special abilities. Tom had learned to trust Rex's instincts completely. The dog often seemed to know things about victims that weren't apparent to the human members of the team. As they drove toward the specially prepared meeting room at the courthouse, Tom reflected on the responsibility they carried. Somewhere in Denver, a killer was walking free, confident that his crime would go unpunished because the only witness couldn't speak. The community was living in fear. Parents were afraid to leave their children with babysitters, and a family was destroyed by grief and trauma. But Tom had seen Rex work miracles before. He had watched his partner somehow reach into the darkest places of human trauma and gently coax out the light that still remained. Rex didn't just help children find their voices. He helped them find their courage, their hope, and their trust in the world again. "All right, partner," Tom said as they pulled into the courthouse parking lot, Rex's ears perking up at the familiar words that signaled the beginning of a new case. "There's a little girl in there who needs us more than she probably even knows. Let's go show her that the world still has good things in it." Rex's tail wagged once, a subtle but confident gesture that told Tom everything he needed to know. They were ready to begin the delicate process of rebuilding a shattered child's world, one gentle interaction at a time. The miracle worker was about to meet the little girl who desperately needed a miracle. The transformation of Interview Room C at the Denver County Courthouse had taken 3 days and the combined efforts of child psychologists, interior designers, and facility staff who understood that every detail could mean the difference between breakthrough and failure. Gone were the sterile white walls, harsh fluorescent lighting, and intimidating metal furniture that typically characterized law enforcement interview spaces. In their place was a warm, inviting environment that looked more like a child's playroom than a government facility. Soft beige walls were adorned with cheerful watercolor paintings of animals and nature scenes, while plush area rugs and gentle pastels covered the cold linoleum floor. Child-sized furniture included a cozy reading corner with oversized pillows, a small table perfect for drawing or playing games, and shelves lined with carefully selected books, puzzles, and stuffed animals. The lighting came from warm table lamps rather than overhead fixtures, creating an atmosphere of comfort and safety. Detective Maria Santos had overseen every aspect of the room's preparation, knowing that Lily's first impression could determine the success or failure of their entire approach. She had consulted with trauma specialists, reviewed case studies from similar situations, and even spoke with other children who had worked with therapy dogs to understand what made them feel most comfortable. On the morning of the first meeting, Lily arrived with her grandmother, Patricia Thompson, who had become her primary caregiver since her parents were struggling to cope with their own trauma from that horrible night. Patricia was a retired elementary school teacher who understood children's needs, but even she was at a loss for how to help her beloved granddaughter emerge from the protective silence that had become her refuge. Lily looked smaller than her 8 years as she entered the transformed space, wearing her favorite purple dress with tiny butterfly patterns, the same style of dress she used to twirl in while chattering about her day. Her dark hair was pulled back in careful braids, but her eyes held none of the sparkle that had once made her the light of her family's world. Instead, those eyes darted nervously around the room, cataloging potential threats and escape routes in a way that no child should ever need to do. Patricia guided Lily to a comfortable chair near the reading corner, speaking in soothing tones about the pretty room and the nice people who wanted to help. But Lily's body language spoke volumes about her internal state, shoulders hunched protectively, hands clenched in her lap, every muscle tense and ready for fight or flight. "The therapy dog will be here soon, sweetheart," Detective Santos said gently, crouching down to Lily's eye level. "His name is Rex, and he's very special. He helps children who have seen scary things feel better. Would that be okay with you?" Lily's only response was a barely perceptible nod, her gaze fixed on her grandmother's hand rather than meeting the detective's eyes. It was the most communication anyone had gotten from her in weeks, and even that small gesture felt like a victory. When Officer Tom Bradley opened the door to bring Rex into the room, he moved with deliberate slowness, understanding that every action would be scrutinized by a traumatized child whose trust in the adult world had been shattered. Rex entered with equal care, his training evident in every measured step as he assessed the situation with those remarkable intelligent eyes. The German Shepherd was magnificent, his thick coat gleamed with health, his posture was confident, but non-threatening, and there was something almost regal about the way he carried himself. But it was his eyes that were truly extraordinary. They held a wisdom and gentleness that seemed to communicate directly with anyone who looked into them, promising safety and understanding without demanding anything in return. Rex positioned himself exactly 6 feet away from Lily, far enough to not feel invasive, but close enough for her to study him safely. He then executed a move that never failed to amaze Tom the dog, carefully lowered himself to the floor in a completely relaxed position, rolling slightly onto his side in a posture that communicated complete trust and vulnerability. It was Rex's way of telling Lily that he was no threat, that he was, in fact, placing himself at her mercy. For the first 30 minutes, the room was filled with a silence that might have seemed uncomfortable to outsiders, but was actually profound in its communication. Rex remained perfectly still, except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing, occasionally letting out a soft sigh that seemed designed to show Lily how calm and peaceful he felt in her presence. Lily, meanwhile, was conducting her own careful assessment. Her rigid posture began to soften almost imperceptibly as she watched Rex's patient stillness. Her grandmother noticed it first, the way Lily's shoulders dropped slightly, the way her hands unclenched just a bit, the way her breathing became less shallow and rapid. The breakthrough moment came in the second hour, so subtle that anyone, not watching carefully, might have missed it entirely. Lily shifted her position in her chair, angling herself to get a better view of Rex. The dog's ears twitched slightly at the movement, but he didn't lift his head or change his position. Instead, he made a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a hum, that seemed to acknowledge Lily's attention without pressuring her for more. That sound had an almost magical effect. Lily's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with curiosity. It was the first time since the night of the attack that she had shown interest in anything beyond her immediate family. Patricia had to fight back tears as she watched her granddaughter lean forward just slightly, studying Rex with the first spark of engagement anyone had seen from her in weeks. By the end of the 2-hour session, Lily had moved from her chair to sit on the floor, still maintaining her safe distance, but clearly fascinated by this calm, patient creature who asked nothing of her except to exist in the same space. It came time to leave. She looked back at Rex 3 times, and Tom could have sworn he saw the ghost of what might someday become a smile. Same time tomorrow? Detective Santos asked Patricia as they prepared to leave. For the first time since the attack, Lily nodded enthusiastically, and everyone in the room knew they had witnessed the first crack in the wall that trauma had built around her heart. A silent partnership had begun, and with it, the possibility that justice might finally have a voice. The second meeting between Lily and Rex began with an unexpected development that made Officer Tom Bradley's heart skip with cautious optimism. When Lily entered the transformed interview room with her grandmother, she didn't immediately retreat to her usual chair in the corner. Instead, she paused at the threshold, scanning the room until her eyes found Rex lying in his familiar spot, and then for the first time in 7 weeks she smiled. It was barely a whisper of a smile, just the slightest upturn of her lips. That lasted no more than 2 seconds, but it was there. Patricia Thompson had to grip the doorframe to steady herself as tears of joy threatened to overflow. Detective Santos, watching through the one-way observation window, felt a surge of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were witnessing the beginning of Lily's journey back to the world of the living. Rex had been waiting in his customary position, but Tom noticed something different in his partner's demeanor today. The dog's ears were more alert. His tail gave the slightest wag when Lily appeared, and there was an energy about him that suggested he sensed the shift in their young visitors' emotional state. Dogs, Tom had learned, were remarkably attuned to human healing processes, often detecting progress before the humans themselves realized it was happening. That third day brought the breakthrough that would change everything. Lily had been sitting, cross-legged on the soft carpet, about 4 feet from Rex, drawing pictures in a sketch pad that Dr. Sarah Martinez, the child psychologist, had provided. Her drawings had been consistently dark since the trauma-black scribbles, angular shapes. That suggested fear and chaos, and images that made the adults exchange worried glances. But today was different. Today, Lily was drawing a dog. It wasn't a masterpiece by any artistic standard. The proportions were childlike. The perspective was off, and the coloring went outside the lines in several places. But it was unmistakably Rex, complete with his distinctive pointed ears, intelligent eyes, and the gentle expression that had become so familiar to everyone working on the case. More importantly, she was using colors other than black for the first time since the attack browns. And golds for Rex's coat, blue for what appeared to be a sky, and green for grass. Rex seemed to sense that he was the subject of artistic attention. He lifted his head slightly, watching Lily work with an expression that Tom could only describe as proud. When Lily held up her finished drawing, to show her grandmother, Rex's tail thumped against the floor, twice his version of applause. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Patricia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Rex looks very handsome in your picture." The fourth day brought physical contact. Lily had been sitting in her usual spot, watching Rex's steady breathing, when she suddenly stood up and walked toward him. Every adult in the vicinity held their breath as the little girl approached the therapy dog with careful, deliberate steps. Rex remained perfectly still, though his eyes tracked her movement with gentle attention. When Lily reached out her small hand to touch Rex's fur for the first time, the moment felt sacred. Her fingers made contact with the soft coat on his head, and Rex closed his eyes in contentment, making that soft humming sound that had become his signature response to children in distress. Lily's hand rested there for nearly 5 minutes before she carefully returned to her spot on the carpet. By the 5th day, something remarkable was happening. Lily was whispering to Rex actual words that no one else could hear, but clearly. Intentional communication directed at her four-legged friend. Tom, watching from the observation room, could see Lily's lips moving as she sat close to Rex, one small hand buried in his thick fur while she shared secrets that only a therapy dog could be trusted to keep. "She's telling him about Jenny," Dr. Martinez observed quietly. "Look at her body language. She's reliving memories, but in a safe way, with Rex as her emotional anchor." The breakthrough that everyone had been hoping for came on day 8. Detective Santos had decided to try a gentle approach to gathering information, bringing in some simple prop stalls, toy furniture, and a dollhouse that roughly resembled Lily's home. She had used these tools with other child witnesses before, allowing them to show rather than tell what they had experienced. Initially, Lily ignored the toys completely, focused entirely on Rex. But then something shifted. Rex, as if sensing what was needed, stood up and walked over to investigate the dollhouse. He sniffed at it curiously, then looked back at Lily with what seemed like encouragement. Lily followed Rex to the dollhouse, and for the first time since the attack, she began to engage with something other than the therapy dog. At first, she simply moved pieces around aimlessly, but gradually, her actions became more purposeful. She placed a small female doll in what would have been the living room, then selected another figure, a larger, darker one, and moved it toward the house. Rex positioned himself directly beside Lily as she worked, his warm presence giving her the courage to continue. When she reached for the dark figure again, her hand trembled slightly, but Rex leaned against her gently, providing physical support along with emotional comfort. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Lily spoke her first words since the show. "Attack. Bad man hurt Jenny." The words were so quiet that Detective Santos had to strain to hear them, but they were unmistakably clear. Rex's response was immediate. He nuzzled Lily's shoulder gently, as if congratulating her for her incredible bravery. Patricia Thompson broke down in tears of relief and gratitude, while Tom felt a surge of pride in his remarkable partner. They had done it. Rex had unlocked Lily's voice. But more importantly, he had given her back her courage, her ability to trust, and her willingness to help seek justice for the young woman who had died protecting her. The little girl who had been trapped in traumatized silence was finally ready to tell her story, and Rex would be right beside her every step of the way, providing the strength and support she needed to face the difficult journey ahead. The legal battle that would ultimately change the American justice system began in the mahogany-paneled chambers of Judge Catherine Morrison on a crisp October morning, 3 months after Jenny Martinez's murder. The preliminary hearing to determine whether Rex would be allowed in the courtroom during Lily's testimony had drawn national attention, with legal experts, child advocacy groups, and media representatives packing the courthouse corridors like a small army preparing for war. Defense attorney Marcus Webb entered, Judge Morrison's chambers with the confident swagger of a man who had built his career on exploiting legal technicalities and procedural loopholes. At 48, Webb was known throughout Denver's legal community as a brilliant but ruthless advocate who would use any means necessary to secure his client's freedom. His client, Robert Hayes, was a career criminal with a rap sheet spanning 2 decades. But Webb was convinced that without credible witness testimony, even a murder charge could be beaten. "Your Honor," Webb began, his voice carrying the polished authority that had intimidated countless prosecutors. "The prosecution's request to allow a therapy dog in the courtroom is nothing more than a desperate attempt to create sympathy where none should exist. This so-called witness is a traumatized child who has been silent for months. Any testimony she might provide would be unreliable at best, contaminated by suggestion and coached responses at worst." Prosecutor Sarah Chun, a rising star in the Denver District Attorney's Office, had spent weeks preparing for this moment. She had researched every legal precedent, consulted with child psychology experts, and reviewed studies from universities across the country about the effectiveness of therapy animals in trauma recovery. Her career had been built on seeking justice for the most vulnerable victims, and she understood that Lily's case could set a precedent that would affect countless future cases involving traumatized witnesses. "Your Honor," Chun countered, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was requesting. "We're not asking the court to make an exception. We're asking the court to recognize that justice sometimes requires accommodation for those who need it most. Lily Thompson is the only witness to a brutal murder, and she has made remarkable progress with the help of a trained therapy dog. To deny her this support would be to deny her the ability to participate in the justice system at all." Judge Catherine Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the bench known for her careful consideration of complex legal issues, had been grappling with this decision for days. She had presided over thousands of cases, but none had presented such a unique challenge to traditional courtroom procedures. The legal precedent was virtually non-existent. Only one other case in U.S. history had involved a therapy dog in a criminal trial, and that case had been settled before appeal. Behind the legal arguments and procedural debates, however, was a more fundamental question about the nature of justice itself. Could a courtroom truly serve justice if its procedures prevented victims from being heard? Was the integrity of the legal system better served by rigid adherence to tradition, or by adapting to meet the needs of those seeking justice? The media attention surrounding the case had been unprecedented. CNN had devoted a full segment to the story of the little girl and her therapy dog, while legal scholars debated the implications on morning talk shows and social media platforms. Child advocacy groups had organized rallies outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for Jenny," and "Let Lily speak." The case had touched something deep in the American consciousness, the fundamental belief that every victim deserves to have their voice heard. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with tension and anticipation. Robert Hayes sat at the defense table, his previous arrogance replaced by obvious concern as he watched the proceedings unfold. He had been confident that his case would never make it to trial, betting on the prosecution's inability to present coherent witness testimony from a traumatized 8-year-old. Now, faced with the possibility that Lily might actually testify, his composure was beginning to crack. The prosecution had called Dr. Amanda Foster from the National Canine Learning Center to testify about Rex's training and capabilities. Her testimony was both technical and deeply moving, as she explained how therapy dogs were specifically trained to provide emotional support without influencing testimony. "Rex doesn't coach or suggest responses," Dr. Foster explained to the packed courtroom. "He simply provides a calming presence that allows traumatized individuals to access memories and emotions that might otherwise remain locked away by psychological defense mechanisms." Webb's cross-examination was aggressive, but ultimately ineffective. His attempts to paint Rex as a potential source of contamination or suggestion fell flat when Dr. Foster calmly explained the rigorous scientific protocols governing therapy dog training and deployment. His efforts to characterize Lily's potential testimony as unreliable were countered by expert witness testimony from child psychologists who explained how trauma affects memory and the importance of providing appropriate support for young witnesses. The turning point came when Detective Maria Santos took the stand to describe Lily's progress over the previous weeks. Her voice broke with emotion as she recounted the moment when Lily first spoke Rex's name, the gradual return of her ability to communicate, and the careful way she had begun to describe the night of the attack through drawings and whispered conversations with her therapy dog. Without Rex, Detective Santos testified, Lily would remain silent, and Jenny Martinez's killer would go free. This isn't about bending the rules, it's about ensuring that justice has a voice. Judge Morrison's decision, delivered after a 2-hour recess, would go down in legal history. While this court recognizes the unprecedented nature of this request, she began, her voice carrying the weight of precedent she was about to establish. We must also recognize that justice is not served when legitimate witnesses are unable to participate in legal proceedings due to trauma beyond their control. The court finds that allowing the therapy dog Rex to accompany the witness Lily Thompson serves the interests of justice while maintaining the integrity of these proceedings. The courtroom erupted in applause from the packed gallery, while Webb's face darkened with the realization that his seemingly unbeatable case had just become significantly more challenging. But the real test was yet to come in just 3 days. Lily would have to walk into a packed courtroom, face her nightmares, and find the courage to speak the words that could bring justice for Jenny Martinez. The morning of October 15th dawned gray and overcast, as if the Denver sky itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold in Courtroom 4A. By 7:30 a.m., news vans lined the streets surrounding the courthouse, their satellite dishes reaching toward the cloudy heavens like metallic prayers for justice. Reporters from major networks had been camping outside since midnight, while court officials worked frantically to manage the unprecedented media attention focused on one small girl and her 4-legged companion. Inside a specially prepared witness waiting room, Lily Thompson sat quietly in her best navy blue dress, the one her grandmother had bought specifically for this day, with tiny silver stars embroidered along the collar that sparkled when she moved. Her dark hair had been braided with extra care, woven through with a ribbon that matched her dress, but her small hands trembled despite Rex's calming presence beside her chair. Rex seemed to understand the magnitude of the day ahead. The therapy dog had been unusually alert since their arrival at the courthouse, his intelligent brown eyes constantly scanning Lily's face for signs of distress, his body positioned protectively between her and the door. Officer Tom Bradley watched his partner with professional admiration and personal pride, knowing that today would test every aspect of Rex's remarkable training. Patricia Thompson held her granddaughter's other hand, whispering gentle encouragements while fighting back her own tears. "Remember what Dr. Martinez told you, sweetheart," she said softly. "Just tell them what you saw, and Rex will be right there with you the whole time. You're the bravest little girl in the whole world." The courtroom itself had been transformed. For this historic day, Judge Morrison had approved the construction of a special witness platform that would allow Rex to sit directly beside Lily during her testimony, close enough for physical contact, but positioned so he wouldn't obstruct the jury's view. The platform was carpeted in soft blue fabric and equipped with a small water dish for Rex, demonstrating the court's commitment to accommodating both witness and therapy dog. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, with every seat filled by a mixture of media representatives, legal observers, victim advocacy groups, and members of the public who had followed the case since its beginning. Jenny Martinez's family occupied the front row, their faces etched with grief and desperate hope for justice. Her mother, Elena Martinez, clutched a photograph of her daughter while tears streamed down her cheeks. At the defense table, Robert Hayes sat between his attorneys, his previous confidence completely evaporated. The 34-year-old career criminal had spent the morning chain-smoking in the courthouse's designated smoking area, his hands shaking as he contemplated the possibility that his carefully constructed alibi might crumble under the testimony of an 8-year-old girl he had assumed would never be able to speak. Defense attorney Marcus Webb maintained his professional composure, but those who knew him well could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed nervously against his legal pad. He had built his reputation on his ability to discredit witnesses, but how do you attack the credibility of a traumatized child without appearing monstrous to a jury? His entire strategy had been based on the assumption that Lily would never testify at all. Prosecutor Sarah Chun felt the weight of not just this case, but of legal history itself pressing down on her shoulders. She had reviewed her notes dozens of times, practiced her gentle questioning techniques with child psychology experts, and prepared for every possible scenario. But she also knew that no amount of preparation could predict how an 8-year-old trauma victim would respond to the pressure of a packed courtroom and the presence of her attacker. When the bailiff called, "All rise," and Judge Morrison entered the courtroom, the silence was so complete that the sound of her footsteps seemed to echo like thunder. She had spent a sleepless night reviewing legal precedents and considering the historic nature of the decision she had made. Never before in American legal history had a therapy dog been allowed to accompany a witness during criminal testimony, and the entire legal community was watching to see if this unprecedented accommodation would serve justice or compromise it. "Before we begin today's proceedings," Judge Morrison announced, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom, "I want to remind everyone present that we are about to hear testimony from a child witness who has experienced severe trauma. This court will not tolerate any disruption, any inappropriate reactions, or any behavior that might further traumatize this brave young witness. Anyone who cannot maintain absolute decorum will be removed immediately." The moment everyone had been waiting for arrived at 10:47 a.m. The courtroom doors opened, and Officer Bradley entered first, followed by Rex walking in perfect formation, his therapy dog vest clearly identifying his official role. Behind them came Lily, so small she seemed almost lost in the formal courtroom setting, holding her grandmother's hand with a grip that spoke of both terror and determination. The reaction from the gallery was immediate and profound. Several spectators were visibly moved to tears at the sight of the tiny girl walking bravely toward her destiny, supported by the magnificent therapy dog who had become her lifeline to the world. Even some of the most hardened court reporters found themselves blinking back tears as they witnessed this unprecedented moment in American jurisprudence. Rex took his position on the special platform with practiced ease, settling into a calm sitting position that would allow Lily to maintain physical contact throughout her testimony. His presence seemed to transform the intimidating witness stand into a safer space, his steady breathing and calm demeanor creating an island of tranquility in the charged atmosphere of the courtroom. As Lily was carefully helped onto the platform, her small hand immediately found Rex's soft fur, anchoring herself to the source of strength that had helped her find her voice. The entire courtroom held its breath as this moment of truth finally arrived, a moment when justice would depend entirely on the courage of one small girl and the unwavering support of her four-legged guardian angel. The silence in courtroom 4 was so profound that the soft hum of the air conditioning system seemed deafening as Lily Thompson settled onto the specially constructed witness platform, her small fingers immediately seeking comfort in Rex's thick golden fur. For 23 agonizing minutes, prosecutor Sarah Chun had attempted every gentle questioning technique in her arsenal, while defense attorneys watched with growing confidence as their strategy of relying on a traumatized child continued. Silence appeared to be working perfectly. Chun's questions had started simple: Lily's name, her age, whether she understood the difference between truth and lies. Each query was met with the same heartbreaking silence that had characterized the little girl's existence for the past 4 months. Judge Morrison watched with increasing concern, knowing that if Lily couldn't testify, not only would Robert Hayes likely walk free, but the groundbreaking legal precedent she had established would be viewed as a failure that might never be attempted. Again, Rex, however, seemed to sense something that the humans in the courtroom could not. A therapy dog's ears had been gradually shifting forward throughout the questioning, his body language becoming more alert and focused. His training had taught him to recognize the subtle signs that preceded breakthrough, moments in traumatized children, the slight change in breathing patterns, the way tension gathered and then began to release, the almost imperceptible shift from protective silence to the possibility of communication. Defense attorney Marcus Webb was barely containing his satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair with the confidence of a man who believed victory was within his grasp, occasionally whispering reassurances to his increasingly nervous client. Robert Hayes had been fidgeting constantly since entering the courtroom, but now he too began to relax, convinced that the prosecution's star witness would never be able to speak the words that could condemn him. The turning point began with something so subtle that most observers missed it entirely. Lily's grip on Rex's fur shifted slightly, her fingers no longer clinging desperately, but beginning to stroke gently, the way she had learned to do during their countless practice sessions. In the interview room, Rex responded with that soft, almost inaudible humming sound that had become his signature method of encouraging traumatized children. Dr. Amanda Foster, watching from the gallery, recognized the signs immediately. She had seen this exact sequence of behaviors during Rex's training exercises, the gradual transition from protective silence to the moment when a child's natural desire for justice overcame their fear. She held her breath, knowing that the next few minutes could change everything. Jenny Martinez's mother, Elena, sat in the front row clutching her daughter's photograph so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had been praying silently throughout the entire proceeding, begging God, Jenny's spirit, and anyone else who might be listening to give this brave little girl the strength to speak for her murdered daughter. When she saw Lily begin to sit up straighter on the platform, something in Elena's heart told her that her prayers were about to be answered. The transformation in Lily was gradual but unmistakable. Her shoulders squared slightly, her breathing became deeper and more controlled, and most significantly, her eyes began to move around the courtroom with purpose rather than fear. Rex seemed to sense the change immediately, shifting his position slightly so that Lily could lean against his solid, warm body while still maintaining eye contact with the people who needed to hear her story. When Lily's gaze finally landed on Robert Hayes at the defense table, the effect was electric. Her entire body went rigid for a moment, but instead of retreating into protective silence as everyone expected, she did something remarkable. She turned to Rex and whispered something directly into his earwords that no one else could hear, but that seemed to give her the courage she needed for what came next. What happened next would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world and studied in law schools for decades to come. Lily Thompson, the 8-year-old girl who had been silent for 4 months, suddenly stood up on the witness platform with a strength and determination that belied her small size. Her voice, when it finally came, was clear and unwavering despite its childlike pitch. "That's him," she declared, pointing directly at Robert Hayes with such conviction that several jurors gasped audibly. "That's the bad man who killed Jenny." The impact of those 5 words was immediate and devastating. Hayes recoiled as if he had been physically struck, his face draining of all color as his carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbled completely. His attorneys scrambled to maintain their composure, but their client's visible reaction had already spoken volumes to the 12 people whose judgment would determine his fate. The courtroom erupted into barely controlled chaos. Several spectators burst into tears, including Elena Martinez, who clutched her daughter's photograph to her chest while sobbing with relief and grief. Judge Morrison had to use her gavel repeatedly to restore order, but even she seemed shaken by the power of Lily's declaration. But Lily wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and 4 months of suppressed memories came pouring out in a torrent of clear, devastating testimony. "I was hiding under my bed," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, while Rex remained steadily by her side. He had a black mask on his face, but I saw his eyes. They were scary eyes. He kept asking Jenny about money, but she told him we didn't have any money. Hayes was visibly trembling now, his hands shaking so violently that he had to clasp them together to hide the tremors. His lead attorney tried to object, but Judge Morrison overruled him before he could even finish speaking, recognizing that this testimony was too crucial to interrupt. "Jenny was crying," Lily continued, her small voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom. "She tried to tell him she was just the babysitter, but he got really mad. That's when he ... Her voice caught for a moment, but Rex's gentle presence gave her the strength to continue. "That's when he hurt her with the loud noise that made me scared." The prosecution's case had just transformed from circumstantial evidence and forensic speculation into the compelling eyewitness testimony of a brave little girl who had found her voice when justice needed it most. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, the shortest deliberation in Denver County Court history for a first-degree murder case. When they returned to the packed courtroom, their faces carried the weight of a decision that everyone present knew would echo through the halls of justice for generations to come. Foreman Margaret Chun, a retired schoolteacher who understood the courage it took for children to speak difficult truths, delivered the verdict with clear conviction. Guilty on all counts. Robert Hayes collapsed into his chair as if his strings had been cut, the last vestige of his arrogance finally extinguished by the power of one small girl's unwavering testimony. His defense team sat in stunned silence, their carefully crafted strategy demolished by 8-year-old Lily Thompson's simple but devastating words. Judge Morrison, maintaining her judicial composure despite the historic nature of the moment, sentenced Hayes to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Justice delivered not through legal technicalities or prosecutorial brilliance, but through the courage of a traumatized child and her extraordinary 4-legged guardian. The immediate aftermath of the verdict was unlike anything the Denver courthouse had ever witnessed. Elena Martinez, Jenny's mother, wept tears of relief and gratitude as she was finally able to begin the healing process that had been on hold for 4 agonizing months. She approached Lily and her family after the proceedings, kneeling down to the little girl's eye level with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Mia," Elena whispered, using the Spanish term of endearment that Jenny had always used with the children she cared for. "You gave my Jenny justice. You were so brave, so very brave." Lily's response was to wrap her small arms around Elena's neck, and in that embrace, 2 families forever connected by tragedy found a moment of peace. The legal ramifications of the case began immediately. Within weeks, Lily's testimony had sparked a nationwide movement for courtroom accommodations for traumatized witnesses, particularly children. Legal scholars from Harvard, Yale, and Stanford published papers analyzing the precedent, while lawmakers in 12 states introduced legislation requiring courts to consider therapy animal accommodations for vulnerable witnesses. the Lily Thompson Law, as it came to be known, was signed into federal legislation 8 months later, requiring all federal courts to provide reasonable accommodations, including certified therapy animals, for witnesses who had experienced severe trauma. The law was championed by Senator Maria Gonzalez of Colorado, who had followed the case from its beginning and recognized its potential to transform the American justice system's treatment of vulnerable witnesses. Rex became something of a celebrity in the months following the trial, but his handler, Officer Tom Bradley, was careful to ensure that the attention never interfered with the dog's primary mission. Requests for Rex's services poured in from across the country, leading to the establishment of the National Therapy Dog Registry for Legal Proceedings, a comprehensive database of specially trained animals available to assist traumatized witnesses. The program expanded rapidly under Dr. Amanda Foster's leadership at the National Canine Learning Center. Within 2 years, over 200 therapy dogs had been trained and deployed across the United States, helping hundreds of traumatized witnesses find their voices in courtrooms from coast to coast. The success rate was remarkable and astounding. 89% of witnesses who worked with therapy dogs were able to provide testimony that led to successful prosecutions. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Lily herself. The little girl, who had been trapped in traumatized silence, gradually blossomed back into the chatty, curious child she had been before that terrible night. Rex became a permanent member of the Thompson family, officially adopted through a special agreement with the Denver Police Department that allowed him to continue his therapy work while living with Lily. 2 years after the trial, Lily started speaking at conferences for victim advocacy groups, accompanied always by Rex, sharing her story to help other children understand that they too could find their voices. Her speeches, delivered with the confidence that only comes from having faced one's greatest fears and emerged victorious, inspired legislative changes in 43 states and influenced courtroom procedures in countries as far away as Australia and the United Kingdom. The foundation that Lily established with her family's help, Voices for the Voiceless, became a driving force in the movement to reform how the legal system treats traumatized witnesses. The organization provided funding for therapy dog training programs, supported families navigating the court system, and advocated for legislative changes that would protect vulnerable witnesses while ensuring their access to justice. Officer Bradley was promoted to captain and given oversight of the expanded Victim Services K-9 unit, which grew from 1 dog to a team of 15 specially trained therapy animals. He often reflected on how Rex had not only solved a murder case, but had fundamentally changed the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served, proving that sometimes the most powerful tools for justice come on 4 legs, with wagging tails. 5 years after that historic day in Courtroom 4I, Lily Thompson stood before the United States Supreme Court as a guest of honor during the landmark case that would extend therapy animal accommodations to all civil and criminal proceedings involving vulnerable witnesses. Now 13 years old and accompanied by an aging but still devoted Rex, she watched as the highest court in the land enshrined into constitutional law the principle that justice must be accessible to all, regardless of age, trauma, or disability. The little girl who had once cowered in silence under her bed, too frightened to speak the truth, had become a powerful voice for justice reform. Her journey from victim to advocate proved that healing is possible, that courage can be cultivated, and that sometimes the most profound changes in society begin with the simple act of one small person finding the strength to speak 2 words. That's him. Jenny Martinez's death had not been in vain. Her memory lived on in every courtroom, where a therapy dog now provided comfort to a frightened witness, in every piece of legislation that protected vulnerable victims, and in the knowledge that justice, when supported by compassion and innovation, can triumph over even the darkest evil.